what we've tried to do within Translation Hub is bring all of Google's translation innovations together in a way that makes sense.
And welcome to Slatapod, everyone. Today, we're really excited to have Malika Iyer on the podcast. Malika is the head of product for Translation AI at Google. Hi, Malika.
Hey, how are you?
Very good. So where does this podcast find you today? What country, what city?
I am in the United States. Right now, I'm in my home office in Redmond, but I work out of the Kirkland office, in the Google Kirkland office.
Obviously, we're really keen to hear about the new Translation Hub that Google launched recently. But before that, just tell us a bit more about your professional background. Like you went from software engineer to now kind of Google, leading Google's Translation AI team. So what was that transition and what brought you to Google eventually?
Yeah, so my background has been in computer science. I did my undergrad and my master's in computer science. I started out as a software engineer, but what was interesting to me about software engineering was solving problems, which, naturally then my next kind of logical step there was I started working a lot with users, customers of the products that I was working on. So at my previous organizations and so on, I became more of a customer-facing software engineer. And then I kind of pulled back and decided, hey, I want to do some more just kind of pure code. So I kind of went back and forth that way. And then I realized that my heart really lies with solving user problems. And the other interesting thing I think that drives me is I am in certain problem spaces interest me just because either because of their complexity or because they just seem hairy and large. And I'm like, hey, that's interesting. Let's go see how we can, make something somewhat concrete and crystallized that'll actually help people. So started out with, this thing called NoSQL before NoSQL even became a buzzword. We're talking like 12 plus years ago. Started out with big data before people started talking about big data everywhere. And then when they did, I was like, okay, I'm out of here. and then I kind of moved into platform as a service, containerization before that was a thing, and eventually found my way to AI because the potential in AI is so enormous, but the problem space, depending on what you're trying to solve, it can still be very ambiguous. So that's kind of how I ended up in Google. And I joined Google towards the tail end of 2017, and I took over as the head of translation for Google Cloud in the beginning of 2022.
Can you just expand a bit more on the current role as global head of product and Translation AI? Where does it sit, like in the Google organization, and what kind of are some of the other units that you're working closely with at Translation AI?
Absolutely. So you're familiar with, I would assume, Alphabet and Google, and one of the biggest arms of Google is Google Cloud, and we serve the enterprise users of Google. So I lead all of the translation products for cloud and for our cloud customers. So in that capacity, my role is to make sure that any of our all of our translation research that we can bring to our enterprise customers, I bring them to our enterprise users. So in this role, I work very, very closely with all of the different research arms of Google, because they're the ones who are working tirelessly on the latest and greatest in neural machine translation, in AutoML translation, and so on and so forth. So as part of as part of Translation AI, there are multiple products that are part of Translation AI within cloud. One of them, or in the most mature one, or the oldest one, is neural machine translation. Also available kind of freely is through Google is through translate.google.com, or you might know it as Google Translate. So we have the enterprise version of that for the cloud. We have a number of additional features that we have built out over a period of time into that API as well. We also have AutoML translation, which is custom translation or domain-specific translation, where we allow the users to bias our underlying model so that they get more domain-specific translations right out of the box. And then we have media translation, and then we have Translation Hub, which is the newest launch. It was launched last year.
So you just said, kind of outlined a bit of the difference between, I guess, the Google Translate API, like the web accessible one, and the Translation Hub. But like the Translation Hub launched back in October 2022. It was big news in our industry, of course, in the language industry. So if you had to describe it like in a very short, kind of 30-second kind of elevator pitch, like how does it differ for the enterprise users from just the raw API or maybe even like the web accessible Google Translate?
The web translation, first of all, it's a free translation interface that's available. So if you are, a company who doesn't, who wants guardrails around how your data is retained, how your data is translated, and those enterprise security features that all companies rightfully care about, then the web translation, the free web translate tool is not the way to go. It's great for casual users. And the API, you mentioned it, it's an API. So you have to actually you have to hook it up programmatically as part of your workflow. There is a decent amount of, developer time that is required to make sure that it's actually part of your workflow. So the main difference between all of these things and Translation Hub is it is literally just make an account on Google Cloud Platform and start adding users. We have had customers onboard their entire organization or their entire teams in under 30 minutes. And most of that was kind of just going to Google Cloud Platform for the very first time and putting your credit card or information in, or your billing information. So the actual setting up users and assets and so on in Translation Hub, it's very, very small, maybe 5 minutes if you have all your assets ready to go, because it's just upload, add users or bulk add users and kind of go. So we integrated with, Google sign in or with, whatever your domain and whatever your email domain is. And you can, there is a lot of flexibility in that way.
You're ready to go. Yeah, we know it from the Google Workspace, of course, how easy it is to onboard new team members. I mean, we're using it here at Slater as well. Now, what was some of the rationale for launching the Translation Hub? Was this like, okay, we have all these existing, individual features, options, ML products, and now we're combining it into one? Or was it like driven by a large number of users, maybe even requesting something like this?
Actually, it was neither. So what we started noticing was, and you guys know this because you're Slater, you write reports on this and publish them. The overall demand for translation and the amount that users or companies are translating, it has increased, but over the course of the last several years. But the interesting thing is the budgets haven't increased in the same way. It's like, do more with less. And what we noticed is the ones that have the budget, they don't suffer, but the ones that need translation, but they don't necessarily have those kinds of elastic budgets, they tend to suffer from the lack of access to high quality translation. So we were primarily driven by, look, we have all of this great tech. Why don't we make something so that translation really, when we say accessible, it really should be accessible. It shouldn't be, hey, here are 5 APIs, go build your own. That is not accessible. It's possible, yes, sure, but that's not what we mean when we say accessibility, right? So as we kind of started looking at this problem, we were like, what can we do to bring the best of Google AI to ensure that our users can continue to keep up with their language, with their content translation demands while not compromising on the quality, and can we do something to increase the speed of translation while at it? Because there is this traditional route, if you will, to translate, which is very much required depending on the kind of content you're translating, where you send content out to a language service provider and then they provide a high quality translation. But these are human beings translating, so it's not going to be instantaneous, for a good reason, but does every piece of content that needs to be translated, does it need to go through that path? If it doesn't, then can we somehow give back the cost advantages and speed to the user for types of content that do need to be translated, but they don't need that same level of high touch translation? So that's kind of the rationale behind why we created the Translation Hub, which is also the reason why it's very lean. If you've tried the Translation Hub, it's intentionally a very, very lean workflow, because it's not meant for where you need 5 or 6 or 7 reviewers looking through the content over and over again to ensure that it's fit for purpose.
Let's also talk about some of the components and the features. You mentioned it before. You got AutoML, which is something that I think you launched maybe 3 or 4 years ago already. It was part of it, like custom machine translation. There's a translation memory component. There's a linguist UI. Can you just kind of list this up for us a bit, and also what type of content format and types the hub supports?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've tried to do within Translation Hub is bring all of Google's translation innovations together in a way that makes sense. So we have 2 tiers in Translation Hub. There's the basic tier and the advanced tier. And basic is just what it says it is. It's, hey, here is neural machine translation. You can do some customization with terminology control, and that's about it. You can retain your format, your document format, to a very large extent, and you're good to go. And within the advanced, we expose a lot more levers for the user, including, you mentioned it, AutoML translation or custom translation, where you can automatically get your models that you've built, the language models, the domain-specific language models for translation. You can use those to translate, so that right out of the box, you will get a higher quality translation. You can also leverage translation memory in our advanced tier. So I don't. Let me know if I think your users probably know what translation memory is. So I'm not gonna.
They do. They do. I hope they do.
Necessarily go into that. I'd assume as much. And in addition, obviously, this is all in addition to neural machine translation and glossary terminology control. So in the advanced, just to kind of list it out, we have neural machine translation, glossary and terminology control, AutoML translation, which is your custom domain models, translation memory, along with translation quality prediction, and the ability to have your format retained. So today we do that for PDFs, we do that for DocX, Microsoft formats, we do that for PowerPoint, we do that for Google Docs, and we do that for slides.
So let's touch on 2 of those. So first, there's also a post-editing tool for linguists, right? So if you want to do the expert in the loop, human in the loop kind of step there, can you tell us a bit more about that, some of the features there?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, keep in mind, this is built kind of in an intentionally lean way. So we have 2 ways to do editing. A user can self-edit, and then they can send it out to a translator to post-edit. And the reason for this is, as we kind of looked through our user base, we learned that many of them, especially in where there are budgetary constraints and so on. These users are usually well versed in at least one of the target languages that they need to translate this content into. So they actually like to they can actually translate some of this content themselves, and they do it anyway. So we figured, hey, let's give them the ability to self-edit, and at the same time, let's ensure that they can reuse these edits if they want to by capturing it in translation memory. And the nice thing about that is once you have enough high quality content in translation memory, you can use it as a source of data to train a new AutoML model, because a TMX file, it can just be fed into an AutoML model and it'll be trained.
Yeah, and then you also mentioned the quality estimation feature, which is actually something that's kind of ahead of even some of the more specialized industry platforms. So can you tell us more about this and how it helps users?
Yeah, so the goal there is, it's MTQP, so machine translation quality prediction. So we launched it first for the quality prediction for neural machine translation, and our goal there was to give the users an easy way to visually get a sense of which content is the lowest on the confidence score, so that they can just go there and attend to that first. And again, this is keeping in line with our goal of, is this piece of content fit for purpose, and what levers can we expose to our users that allow them to get there really, really fast. That's the main goal there. Once they edit the content, if they want, it'll automatically be retained in translation memory. If they don't want, it won't be.
So it's like triaging and making sure that maybe some of the content that's very high quality already coming straight out of the machine translation, they don't have to look at it anymore, and basically just triage what still needs a human review into that stream, I guess. So now we're at Google, at Slater. We're running on Google Workspace, of course. So we could immediately set up the hub and have maybe it will probably take us 5 or 10 minutes. But what if an organization is not running on Google Workspace? Is that even possible to use the hub, or not at all? You got to be on
Yeah,
Google Workspace.
it's absolutely possible, because Translation Hub is a Google Cloud product. So if you have Workspace, great. If you don't have Workspace, that's fine too. This is the reason we have two ways to sign in. We have a sign in with Google, and we have a sign in with email and password. So independent of your domain, you could be using Office 365, you could be using something else. It doesn't matter. You could be using Workspace, but you don't want to leverage that for whatever reason. So you could just use your regular email password as sign in with email and password. So your Translation Hub admin can set up all of these things once they during the process of onboarding users to the Translation Hub. So it should be pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Should be pretty straightforward, right? Okay. I thought it was probably mostly limited to Workspace, but more open.
No, it's not.
Let's talk a bit about language and language combinations that you have on the hub. Obviously, Google Translate's probably the most comprehensive technology there for translation in terms of language coverage, like 130, 150 probably in the target languages, and all the combinations, you get into the thousands. What are some of the most used languages you're seeing currently on the Translation Hub, and maybe where do you see momentum building as well?
I expected to see kind of the most common languages being used. And when I say common languages, the most spoken languages in the world, or in the most spoken languages in the United States, if the users are United States users, I would make a guess, hey, maybe we will see Spanish as one of the highest. But actually, that did not seem to be the case at all, because where the hub seems to really be delivering on solving for user pain is the languages where it's harder to find experts, or it's possible to find experts, but because they are not as many of them, it's expensive. So we've actually seen kind of the lesser less frequently spoken languages, if you will. I don't have a full list with me, as actually the more commonly used languages in Translation Hub, along with the usual suspects, depending on which country or which region you're operating it from.
I guess that's also in line with like the mission, like lowering the barrier very far and having, basically a lot more people being able to access this. Very interesting. So it's not immediately like the FIGs, the French, Italian, German, Spanish, and the Chinese.
Right. The usual suspects are there, but they're not, they aren't the only ones. We saw quite an interesting trend there, and which made sense because the goal here, we built it because we wanted translation to be accessible. We wanted content to be accessible in all languages. And the ones who are, always disadvantaged by the high price or lack of accessibility are the ones who they don't there aren't that many of those kinds of those language speakers. So we're seeing an interesting trend there, and I'll tell you a little bit more when we kind of go into the sectors that we see use translation more, and so on and so forth.
Now, in some of the early reviews, not ours, but some of the early reviews, we saw some industry observers kind of mentioned that they're missing some connectors to like third-party content repositories, like the Adobe Experience Manager, the Drupal, Eloqua, Zendesk, Salesforce, etc. Like, are there any plans to like open the hub up to those, what I guess we can call content on-ramps, or how do you see that?
Yeah, so I expected this this kind of review initially because it was a trade-off initially between how lean do we want to keep it on the initial launch, because we want people to focus on what's available in the hub today, but there's absolutely a plan to open it up and make it more accessible and more kind of easy to integrate with different with other products, with third-party products. So that's definitely on the roadmap. It's coming sometime very soon, sometime over the course of 2023 for sure.
It's like a never-ending list. I mean, if you look at like the MarTech stack, it's like 5,000 logos in there, and it's just there's so many content repositories. But yeah, I mean, the ones that are listed are probably some of the most heavily used. So I'm sure a lot of people will be expecting that. Yeah. Hey, you had a very interesting case study, Avery Dennison, on the launch, and I watched the YouTube video. But for those that haven't had a chance, like, what was their key pain point, and how did the hub help kind of to address it for them?
Avery Dennison, so they're a global manufacturing company, and they're a very, at least their global comms team it's a very interesting group. They're ahead of the curve in a lot of ways, because they look at technology and AI and kind of go, hey, where can we use this to solve problems that that will drastically change or enhance the quality of life of our employees or our customers or our users. So Avery Dennison, what they did, which I thought was phenomenal, they rolled Translation Hub out to all of their employees in their organization. And their goal was to promote employee engagement, to promote kind of an inclusive workspace, because these are things that people say, but to actually do it, you have to roll out technology and make sure that these things are accessible. Language is only one part of it, right? There are other things when you talk about inclusivity and employee engagement and so on. But since we're talking about translation, I will stick to the language aspect of it. So what they did was they rolled Translation Hub out to all of their employees, and they started seeing, and they rolled out a number of AutoML models as well. And what they started seeing was their employees were translating kind of everything from, factory, information, sheets that are tacked up on the notice board, things like that. I mean, I'm paraphrasing here from my peer at Avery Dennison. But it was very, very well received. He told me that, and he shared this publicly, that they were at some point translating from 32 to 48 languages or something, if I'm remembering that correctly. And it was fairly simple for them to just, send out their global communication, message from the CIO and kind of leadership to all of their employees. So, and alongside that, they also mentioned that they didn't get any tickets on, hey, I cannot access it, or hey, this is problematic, or hey, this is not working, which is a dream, right, for anyone who is in charge of making sure that any tech stack is running. So ideally, you want the number of tickets to be very, very low. So this I thought that this was phenomenal what they did, because they actually delivered on what it actually means when it comes to language and translation and content accessibility, when it comes to those aspects within the inclusivity and employee engagement. And I know they're doing a lot of other cool things, but we'll keep this to translation here.
And it's also not maybe the first sector that would come to mind when you think about a translation hub launch, like,
Absolutely.
manufacturing. So, is that is it generally quite broad what you're seeing in terms of user uptake, or are there particular sectors or maybe user groups within the enterprise that are kind of leading the way in adoption?
What we're seeing is the underserved, generally, where there is a tremendous amount of content. That's where we are seeing a significant amount of traction. So, what comes to mind when you think about that? Government, public sector, education. And on the flip side, healthcare, retail, manufacturing, which when you think about these industry sectors, they are also, they think about, okay, you don't think about a budgetary constraint when you think about these sectors, but translation needs are very real and nobody's budget is increasing. So we kind of see both sides, but it's and they are all looking at Translation Hub for somewhat similar reasons, where we don't have a huge budget, but we have a lot of content to translate, and we need it translated yesterday, and we cannot wait for 2+ weeks, or we don't want to pick and choose which content we want to translate because it takes XX dollars to translate one page, or so on and so forth.
So you already kind of gave us a bit of a preview of the features when you talked about the additional connectivity, right, to these third-party systems. But what else can we expect from the hub in 2023? A lot of people want to know.
Some of the things that we're looking at is more content types. So I told you what document formats we support today. We want to keep expanding that, and we're looking at additional formats. I don't have the full list with me, but expect more document formats to be supported for sure. We're also looking at kind of additional fine-grained control within translation memory, for example. We're looking at making AutoML even more accessible to our users. So this is, again, very, very research heavy, and this may not actually be available in 2023, but we're continuously trying to make it so that our domain-specific translation models are easier and easier for users to build. So that's something that we'll be working on over the course of 2023, because that has a huge impact right out of the box on the quality of translation. So yeah, I mean, these are some of the top kind of things that I can share. There are a lot of little things that will continue adding, a lot of them around user experience, intuitive user journeys, and so on and so forth. We'll add more kinds of users, more kinds of roles for users, and it's a fine balance, because we don't want to make it complex. It's so easy to make something
Those systems
complex.
can get very complex. Yes. You don't want to rebuild that again.
Correct. And we don't want to go in that direction. Those systems exist for a reason, and and which is fine. So our goal is to keep it simple and lean for the users who want that simplicity. So it's going to be a balancing act, but we're going to try to introduce as many features as we can while keeping it simple. We won't compromise on the simplicity and ease of use of the Translation Hub.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, Malika, that was fascinating. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you. It was great.